Good evening again, and welcome to the 4th annual Midwest Climate Summit. This is our second in-person event, but our 4th annual Climate Summit, and we are so excited to be here in Indianapolis. I'm Heather Navarro. I'm the director of the Midwest Climate Collaborative, and I want to thank all of you for attending tonight and those of you who are tuning in virtually as well. We look forward to connecting with you, whether over the conference app or in follow-up conversations. This event this week is about building relationships. We are all here because we care about our Midwest communities and we understand their connections to the entire planet. To work on climate change, as you all know, is to take part in the great weaving of science, culture, policy, art, touching on everything from health, housing, food, justice, wildlife, and so much more. Whether you educate others for a living, conduct research, whether you design, build, or govern, we need you. Our problems are complex, and everything on our planet is intricately connected with everything else. So our solutions must be equally interconnected and intersectional. Understanding and appreciating that complexity and moving forward together with solutions happens right here this week. Our theme is finding regional alignment, and yes, it is a nod to the upcoming eclipse, and it's also a call to action. We must align our sustainability goals with our goals around clean health, around clean air, around healthcare, around racial equity, workforce development, affordable housing. So find your collaborators this week and stay in touch with them. As I travel around the region, I regularly meet people who feel isolated in their institutions and in their communities working on climate. But I hope that this week we will all see that we are not alone in this work. While the threat of climate change can seem incomprehensible some days, the thing we can understand, the thing we can keep coming back to is relationships to one another, to the land, to all of its creatures, and our shared past, present, and future. The Midwest Climate Collaborative was created to strengthen connections, to amplify what's working in our region, and build capacity to get more done together. This conference has been organized to highlight your voices, build our collective knowledge, and expand what's possible on climate action in the Midwest. We know that what works here in Indianapolis, in Madison, in Columbus, in Wichita is more relevant than what happens on the coast. Through this event, we have the chance to shape an equitable and effective response to climate change that reflects our region, that considers our unique challenges and opportunities, our erratic weather, and will create lasting relationships that are going to continue to serve us as we continue in this work, as we go back to our home communities. So before I introduce a couple of people who are working hard here in Indiana, I want to thank the folks who have made this event a reality. This event couldn't happen without our planning committee. So I would like everyone who served on that committee to either stand or wave so that we can thank you for all of your hard work in pulling this event together. Where are you? I know you're out there. Thank you. Yes. They all have ribbons on this week, so if you see them, please give them a special thank you. I also want to thank our sponsors for their generous support, and you'll be able to learn more about their commitments to climate tomorrow at the reception. And now I would like to welcome and thank two people who are working hard here in Indiana, two people who have taken the Midwest Climate Summit to the next level by engaging local climate leaders, community voices, and they've really helped pull, again, this fabulous event together. And those are our summit co-chairs, Shannon Anderson, the Executive Director of Earth Charter Indiana, and Lindsay Tremere, the Community Engagement Manager for the Indianapolis Office of Sustainability.
Hey everyone. My name is Shannon Anderson, and I am the Director of Advocacy for the nonprofit Earth Charter Indiana. We are a statewide climate justice organization focused on local solutions to the climate crisis, working with cities and towns, and especially our children to advance these solutions. Um, it is my honor to be your co-chair here with Lindsay today, and to thank all of you for being here. And then also to acknowledge the baby elephant in the room. I had a daughter 2 weeks ago tomorrow. Um, and nothing quite fixes one's resolve on urgent climate action like falling in love with a person who will turn 30 in 2054. So we all know what we need to accomplish and how little time we have. So I want to share my and Ravenna's personal gratitude for all of you, for all your late nights and your determination in the face of setbacks that's embodied here in this room. Indiana isn't known as a climate action state, but it's because of our advocates and local visionaries that it's outperforming states of similar profiles in many significant ways. The work that my organization and many others, especially the incomparable Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute, have been engaged in climate in our cities and towns, large and small, has led to over 20 local governments here in Indiana being engaged in climate resilience in some way, and over a dozen having passed youth-led climate policy. So we lead the Midwest in student-led local climate action resolutions. This culture of grassroots young support has created a momentum for the state to take measures under the IRA, under BIL and IIJA that it may otherwise not have taken, and for cities and schools to be ready to seek these funding opportunities in time to take them. It is an honor and a joy to support these folks on the policy front lines as they make progress in many ways that were previously called impossible. I hope that for all of you, that you can find and support the local talent and passion of young people in your states and professionals in ways that surprise even you in this mission that we all share. I want to thank so much Heather and Marcia, the whole WashU team, and especially Lindsay, who's pulled extra weight this last few weeks on my behalf. She's been a wonderful co-chair, and I'm going to hand it off to her now.
Thank you, everyone. It's really thrilling to be able to welcome all of you to Indianapolis today. And looking out in the room, I see so many familiar, friendly faces. And I know all the amazing work that you folks are doing on sustainability and climate here in Central Indiana. So I can only imagine how much else is going on in the region with all the faces that we have yet to meet. And I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to travel here. I know some folks experienced some weather yesterday that was on the extreme side of things, which is a bit on the nose for what we're here gathering for. I think last year there was a snowstorm. So of course this year we had tornadoes and flooding and ice. So glad you all got here safely. I just really quickly want to take a shout out to my team, the Indianapolis Office of Sustainability. Morgan, Mo, and Madison are all here in the room. They'll be here throughout the week along with myself. And we'd love to have more conversations with you all to learn more about the work you're doing and to just help you get to know Indianapolis. And thank the three of you for allowing me to take time out of my position over the last few months to help make this event a reality. Our team is doing amazing, amazing work, including applying to or being a supporting partner in $42 million worth of funding grant applications last year alone. Yeah, it's incredible. Still waiting to hear back on a lot of those, but we are also administering Indy's energy benchmarking policy, the first of its kind in the state, and helped launch Indiana's first green bank, which we'll hear more about tomorrow. And even this week, we just launched the Thriving Neighbors series, which is an opportunity for Indy Parks to host sustainability and climate related programming, totally free for all ages of the family in our park centers this spring. So that's really exciting. I just wanted to take one moment to mention all the students who are here with us this week. I know it can be nerve-wracking to feel like you have to network with strangers, but remember, everyone else in this room has been a student once before, and we are here to help and answer your questions and learn from you and share information. So throughout the week, please don't hesitate to make new connections and talk to folks. Okay, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Indianapolis's 49th mayor, a born and raised Hoosier himself, Mayor Joe Hogsett.
Well, indeed, welcome. On behalf of the city of Indianapolis, we are glad that we are all gathered for such an important topic. I appreciate Lindsay's admonition that all of us at one point in time have probably been in school and asked to network, which can be challenging. I thought she was very gracious when she said all of us at one point, without going into any more definition, because it's been a while. And let me just go off script for 20 seconds before I get to the gist of my observations and remarks. First of all, isn't it wonderful to be face to face with one another, back together again? I would be committing mayoral malpractice if I did not encourage. I guess we have 11 or 12 different states represented. I'm sorry about the travel plans that got delayed, but we'll try to make this stay of yours here in the host city of Indianapolis the most pleasant one that we can possibly provide you. But as mayor, I'm obligated to say, while you are here, get out, see our city. It's very walkable. It's very negotiable. It's very welcoming. But also take time to spend lots of money. I have to check that off there. I often use these occasions to tout the achievements of Indianapolis as a nationally recognized host city. But I also want to take a moment to share with you a few of the recent efforts that we in Indianapolis are taking in terms of climate resilience. In July of last year, Lindsay referenced this, our region received $1 million from EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And as many Hoosiers here know, this grant has enabled a new level of collaboration and coordination as part of the Central Indiana Environmental Action Plan. But in the previous 6 years, the city of Indianapolis and our Office of Sustainability were well on their way to already making significant progress. That included the deployment of our city's first comprehensive sustainability and resiliency plan, the state's first energy benchmark policy for buildings, as Lindsay referenced, and a host of infrastructure upgrades like the newly FEMA recognized Indy North levee system. Anybody here from Rocky Ripple? Okay, Jim knows. And a countywide bus rapid transit network. All of that has been done in these past 6 years. But at this summit, we see that what we have in a growing movement in the Midwest for real change. And that's why I'm so pleased that so many of you are here for this conference. I want to take an opportunity to thank the Midwest Climate Collaborative for bringing this important show of unity to our city, the city we call home, Indianapolis. In fact, we are gathered at one of America's most decorated campuses, of which I proudly possess a degree. Yeah. And IU Indianapolis's commitment to a more sustainable future. The partnership that the city of Indianapolis enjoys with Indiana University in Indianapolis is very important to both of our institutions. And that is why we spend so much time in collaboration, working together for a better Indianapolis and a better future for all of Indiana. However, I'm sure the chancellor will want to speak specifically to that collaborative effort in detail. So let me close by just simply one last time offering welcome to everyone here. We pride ourselves, you know, they call it Hoosier hospitality, and I hope you are able to enjoy a little bit of it. We take great pride not only in the strides that we are making in climate change and resiliency and sustainability, but we also take a great pride in being a community that welcomes all. And that is why I'm so proud to be the mayor of this city. So to everyone gathered here doing this important work, not just in this community, but be able to take it home to your own communities and our greater Midwest community. Let me, on behalf of the city of Indianapolis, offer you our thanks. God bless you and enjoy the Climate Summit.
Thank you, Mayor Hogsett. We are also grateful to our summit hosts, IUPUI, Indiana, and Indiana University's Environmental Resilience Institute, and Dr. Ramshan, the inaugural Chancellor of IU Indianapolis and Executive Vice President of Indiana University. Chancellor Ramshan joins the campus at a pivotal time in its history. Many of you may have seen the new signage and branding. There's a lot going on here in Indianapolis with IUPUI, Purdue, and the new IUI. And she leads one of the nation's premier urban research universities. And her Midwest roots run deep. I just recently learned that she earned her doctorate in finance from Northwestern University. And then she served as the provost and executive vice chancellor for academic affairs at the University of Missouri from 2018 until coming here to Indiana. She is an expert in international and corporate finance. And in her previous roles in Missouri and the University of Houston, she focused on student success, strengthened the research enterprise, and advanced strategic initiatives that increased enrollment and created partnerships on campus and with the community. At the Midwest Climate Collaborative, we look forward to working with her on these same initiatives and to expanding on the success of IU's Environmental Resilience Institute and Office of Sustainability, both of which are great models for the entire region, demonstrating what's possible on campus and through ERI, what a collaborative partner in an academic institution can do for their communities across the entire state. So please join me in welcoming Chancellor Ramshan.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for those kind words. I couldn't agree more with the mayor, not just because he's our alum, but this is the truth. This is day 42 or 43 on the job for me. And this is truly an amazing city, a very welcoming city. I call it the Goldilocks city. It's neither too big nor too small. Yes, there's traffic, but it's not Chicago. It's not Missouri. We have a perfect airport. So it's an amazing place to be. So I just want to underscore what he said. And yes, if you can, please do go out and spend some dollars. There's some great eating places around here. So it's a great campus. But really, I want to thank all of you, welcome you to our home, which is really this beautiful campus. And thank you for stewarding this cause. the focus on our climate. This morning we heard, I started my day reading about the earthquake in Taiwan and a possible tsunami headed towards Japan. I don't think it happened. I was watching it on the news, but and we live in interesting times when so much is changing. Storms, earthquakes, tsunamis. It feels like it's becoming something we're being forced to get used to. So the conversations that you all are going to have are critical and so very timely. And for that, I thank you for taking the time to be here to engage in those conversations. As Lindsay shared, and as some of you might know, Indiana University and Indiana University in Indianapolis, we were both founding members of this collaborative. Our faculty member, Dr. Gabriel Filippilli, serves on your steering committee and is director of our Environmental Resilience Institute. And the focus we have is ensuring that the research we do informs conversations and solutions to this problem of climate change, whether it's through grants that our faculty are receiving, but also taking that research and that knowledge that's created into the classroom. So we engage our students. They're going to be the next generation of leaders taking this conversation forward. And we do it across the board, whether it's a program in the Kelley School of Business or the Luddy School or of Informatics, or it's in public health. The idea of sustainability and making sure that we respect our environment is key to the programmatic efforts on this campus. Importantly, I also want to share that the way we've envisioned an environmental resilience is really about thinking about the environment more broadly, including it to mean a very inclusive environment where everyone feels respected and feel like they belong. Urban, rural, indigenous, economically disadvantaged, everyone feels respected. And I think that takes the conversation to a whole new level. It's no wonder that we are happy to be ranked as 8th and in the top 10% in the world for achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, something we're really proud of and something that couldn't happen but for the hard work of our faculty. So I encourage you to read about those goals. It's been fascinating for me to understand what it's about and how we are actually helping our students understand that as well. We have a climate action plan, and our goal is to reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 carbon emissions and to ensure carbon neutrality of scope 1 and scope 2 by 2040. And it's a goal we take very seriously on this campus. There is a lot more we're doing. We're a tree campus. I just found out we're a bee campus. And even, for instance, the work we're trying to do as we realign and move from IUPUI to IU Indianapolis, the materials, the signs, the T-shirts, everything associated with IUPUI is being recycled and converted in a way that respects the environment. And I could not be more proud of the work that our faculty and staff are doing. So bottom line, we want to be a happy campus. We want to be a happy community. And there is you all probably know this, Matt Haig, a journalist and an author, who says this about Finland. And he says, Finland is the happiest country on the world if you look at all the happiness indices. And Finland also has 75% of the geography is forest. And there is a link between the two, right? So when I think about happiness and I think about the happiness of future generations, about those, our children and our grandchildren who are not in this room, that's a responsibility we have to them to make sure that the future remains bright for them. So thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation, and kudos to the organizers for making this happen. Thank you.
Me again, y'all. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, who is a student at Purdue Polytechnic High School. She is a student reporter and intern for her high school and also participates in student government and mock trials. She is the director of our Youth Environmental Press team, which is a fabulous program for talented young writers like herself to want to write more about climate and climate solutions. She is also the director for the legendary Confront the Climate Crisis, who, if I talk about that organization, I will cry. So I'm not going to. Please look them up on your phone. They are a wonderful youth-led organization that has accomplished the unthinkable of having a climate task force bill heard at this Indiana state legislature. So I want to introduce Raina Maga, who is your next speaker. Raina, can you come up?
I'll start by saying that I'm not really tall, so if I stood behind there, you probably wouldn't see me. So I want you all to imagine what a traditional bill would go through to be created in the state of Indiana. It probably starts with the legislator confronted by an issue that their constituents brought to them. And then with the help of the Indiana Legislative Services Agency, they would create this bill, it'd be introduced, and I'm sure we all took a civics class, so it has to go through the committee, the Senate, House, and then signed by a governor. Well, for 3 Indiana bills introduced over the past 3 years, those bills started very differently. In fact, they started in a Zoom meeting one random Thursday night when my peers and I were discussing environmental legislation. On that night, we were discussing a bill that was introduced during the 2022 legislation, and that bill was written by us and along Senator Alting. It was one of the most innovative bills ever introduced in Indiana because it was written by high school students like me and many other high school students over the state of Indiana. And that bill would have created a climate task force that would not only tell Hoosiers that the state of Indiana cares about climate change, but our legislators are committed to learning more about how we could confront the climate crisis here in Indiana. That bill didn't pass, unfortunately, but we didn't give up. The second year, we joined another Zoom meeting and we started working on the same bill, but with feedback we had gotten over the legislative session. So that meant maybe taking out a few members of that task force, adding new policies, taking out policies, and we reintroduced that bill again with Senator Shelley Yoder. And that bill got one of the first hearings that we've ever gotten in the Senate Environmental Affairs Committee. On that day, dozens of high school students from all over Indiana traveled to come to a Senate hearing in a committee to see a bill that they'd written come to fruition. And unfortunately, that bill didn't get a vote, so it unfortunately died. Now, it may seem like there is a story here of legislation that keeps getting introduced and keeps dying. Well, that's true. I want you to focus on the most important part. The fact that it was written by high school students, and the fact that that's the story of Indiana and Indianapolis. Over the couple years that Indianapolis has taken a leader role in the climate action movement, we've introduced over 10 resolutions in our amazing cities. And those resolutions weren't just resolutions where students participated in. There were resolutions facilitated by students, some of those entirely written by students. And I'd like to direct you to a student in Elkhart, Indiana right now, who has written a resolution, a climate resolution entirely on her own, who's met with our city council, who's met with our mayor and is trying to pass that resolution right now. That's the work that's being done here in Indiana, the work being done by high school students, middle school students. And I'd like to point to a story that I often tell in a comedic manner, but a couple of weeks ago, I was at the State House testifying on a PFAS bill. I was looking at the monitor, tracking the hearing. I turn around and I see my environmental sustainability teacher. Part of me wanted to pretend like I didn't see her because I was supposed to be in school. And then a couple of seconds later, I realized she's also supposed to be in school. So I go up to her and I say, why are you here? And she says, because this bill is important. In fact, a couple of weeks ago in our class, we were discussing PFAS. and how dangerous it is to our human system. So she was here in that state house about to testify, showing us that we're not just talking about these issues in classrooms, we're bringing them outside of the classroom. We're advocating for those issues. So I went up there and I testified, and I knew that my high school teacher was outside watching me. And that's what it's all about. The fact that while we're high school students and we're doing innovative things, it's all about the adults supporting us. The adults like Shannon, who introduced me a couple minutes ago, Jim, who everyone has probably met, and many other individuals who supported us in passing those resolutions, writing the bills that keep dying, and writing the bills that will also hopefully one day pass. But those adults aren't just necessarily teachers or mentors we have. Those adults are individuals who've done it before us, the individuals we look up to, the individuals that we watch closely, the individuals we gain inspiration from. And one of those individuals has graced us with her presence today, Leah Thomas, our keynote speaker. And while we talked a lot about environmental policy and what environmentalism looks like, I want you all to focus about what we often don't talk about, the social issues that are embedded in environmentalism. That's why in May of 2020, Leah coined the concept of an intersectional environmentalist through an Instagram post. Now, for the people here who don't know what Instagram is, I'm kidding. And this Instagram post changed not only her life, but also the lives of many high school and college students watching her movement, which turned into a nonprofit called the Intersectional Environmentalist, and launched her career as an author. And she wrote a book that many of you probably have. Get a sign, you won't see her again, probably. The Intersectional Environmentalist. And I want to say that while she's done amazing things in her career, where it all starts is where we learn, and that's in the classrooms. Leah went to Chapman University, where she got a BS in environmental science and public policy. And in that classroom, Leah noticed that many of the issues that she cared about, many issues that marginalized communities face, weren't discussed in those classrooms. That's why she's here today. That's why she started a nonprofit. And that's why she wrote a book. Because we can't just talk about the climate crisis as a disconnected issue from social issues we face. They're connected. And that's why she's an intersectional environmentalist. And with that, join me in introducing our keynote speaker, Leah Thomas.
You're so good. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Lovely. I just want to give it up for Raina again. You superstar. Oh my goodness. When I was 16, I was watching Degrassi. Anyone familiar with that show? It's kind of like the precursor for Euphoria. So yeah. And I'm just super excited to be here. I'm from Florissant, Missouri. Usually when I'm, oh, yay! Usually when I'm speaking, I live in LA now, I always say, has anyone been to Missouri, heard of Missouri, seen Missouri? And I'm finally in a room where I don't have to do that. So I'm just so stoked. And I'm going to show you all two things before we get started that I'm trying to make cool. So please, just get into it. So when I say the Midwest, you say matters. The Midwest? The Midwest? Hey. Okay. And then something else that I'm trying to do that my friends in LA are like, please never do that again. Okay, so it's an MW. Little M. W. Do. Okay, so when they say throw up what you know, do that. So I'm also pretty short, but the podium is kind of my comfort place, but I'll move around so you all can see me. But yeah, I'm just so excited to be here with you all, and I'll just tell you all a little bit about my climate journey, why I really love eco-communications, how I kind of became an accidental activist, and how you all can too, but maybe a little bit more intentionally. But this is just so amazing. I'm really in awe to be here. And the Midwest is often left out of the climate conversation. And there's so many inspiring people, like everyone in this room, that's doing amazing work. And we also, as you all know, have so many environmental justice issues here. So we really need to make sure that the Midwest. Okay, cute. So I grew up in Florissant, Missouri, and I did what a lot of Midwesterners do. And it's funny telling this story to a group of Midwesterners, so you all could totally call me out if I say something that's like not accurate. But I was running around catching toads, doing all those sorts of things, looking at fireflies. I grew up in Florissant. My grandmother lives in North St. Louis, that is now being popularized by the rapper Sexy Red, if anyone knows who that is. So I had a pretty diverse experience in St. Louis, going from North St. Louis, North City, in St. Louis to Florissant, the suburbs. And I also went to school in Ladue, which was a really interesting experience. And pretty early on, I noticed environmental inequality, but I didn't really have the words for it. I just knew when I was in Ladue or over by WashU, that's where all of the beautiful parks were. And then when I went back to Florissant, which also had some lovely parks, but what's it called? Coldwater Creek. Okay, so we have creeks, but they're polluted over in Florissant. And I always wanted to spend time in Forest Park. And I didn't spend as much time in Florissant. So definitely was maybe learning about environmental inequality from a younger age. And then when it came time for college, like many Midwesterners, and I kind of wish I didn't do this, I kind of want to move back. I went to, not too soon, I went to Los Angeles and wound up in Southern California. And I've been living there for the last 10 years. And I first was studying biology and absolutely hated it. But my mom wanted me to be a doctor. So after my first year, I came back home and I said, Mom, there's another program. It's also a BS. Okay. And it's called Environmental Science and Policy. So who knows? Maybe I could be a doctor. But I really wanted to be a communications major, and that will connect to the rest of my story. So during the summer of 2014, while I was in Florissant, Missouri, I changed my major to environmental science, and I had about 2 weeks before I was to go back to California and start my new eco-SUSTE, which is short for sustainable, major. Very excited. And unfortunately, I got a call from a friend of mine asking me if I knew a gentleman by the name of Michael Brown. And at that time, I did not know Michael Brown, but his name has been implanted in my memory ever since then. And I spent the next 2 weeks before beginning my major really seeing my city transform during the Ferguson uprisings, and a lot of conversations, not just throughout the Midwest, not just throughout St. Louis, but all over the nation, talking about social justice in a way that I had never seen before. And it really is true, when something hits that close to home, it can really transform your life. So I'm sure many of us remember the Ferguson uprisings, and I went back home to California, and suddenly Ferguson, Missouri was on TV, which again was wild. And I was beginning my major as an environmental science student, and I was learning about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and John Muir and all of these things. And I couldn't focus. Not only was I one of the few women in my classrooms, I was also one of the only Black students in Orange County, California. And I couldn't focus about, when we were talking about the Clean Air Act, I just thought, okay, how can I celebrate the Clean Air Act when so many people in communities like Ferguson, Missouri, don't have the right to breathe in kind of every sense of the meaning? And for me, in particular, as an environmental student, I started focusing on air quality. And it started with Ferguson. I felt like the concept of social injustice was too big for me or anyone, and wanted to find a niche that maybe I could play a role in. Because I was in Southern California and exploring ecosystems I had never seen before. I went surfing, little, for the first time. I went hiking, I was backpacking, backcountry camping, doing all these things that my family looked at me kind of sideways for doing. And I just was so frustrated, and I couldn't let Ferguson and St. Louis escape from my mind. So I grew really angsty, like many teenagers do. And again, I wanted to make sure that everyone in communities like Ferguson, in communities across the Midwest, had access to their basic human environmental rights. And really, they should be rights, but they're not: clean air and clean water. Because I kept replaying in my mind, and I know, again, I was 19 or something at the time, like, how could Ferguson not have happened? And it's kind of funny looking back at that time. But I thought, well, maybe if everyone had clean air and clean water, and if everyone could prance around in the parks and do all these things, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. And that's just what was playing as a fantasy in my mind. And I wanted to do everything in my power to make that a reality. And I know that's way too much of a simplification, but to think about it, it shouldn't be. Everybody should have clean air and clean water and a safe and healthy living environment, and be able to develop a beautiful relationship with Mother Earth. So logically, the next summer, I decided to become a park ranger. And let's see if anyone has been to Nicodemus, Kansas. Okay, less. Kansas in general. Okay, that's great. So to kind of heal from everything that happened the year before, I decided to apply for the Student Conservation Association. If there's any students in here, please take that down. They basically pay you to go work in a national park. And I applied really late, so I was assigned to the least visited national park in the entire National Park Service system. We had an average of 0 to 2 visitors a day. So, so because of that, I had a lot of free time, and I hung out with a lot of farmers, rode around on combines, and it was really funny because at that point, my dream was to work at the Environmental Protection Agency. And this city was so small. It was the type of city that as soon as I emerged and I went to the Dollar Tree, because that was like the only store you could shop at, people would stop you with their carts and say, "Who are you kin to?" So it was an interesting experience. And I had a lot of fun connecting with people that I otherwise probably wouldn't, like farmers in the Midwest. And word travels fast in a small town, and they started hearing that my big dream was to work for the Environmental Protection Agency. And then all of a sudden, these like 50 and 60-year-old wheat farmers had me on their combine, and they were just telling me about all their frustrations with the government and how they'd be totally cool with going organic if, maybe they were supported, and all these sorts of things. And it really changed my 19-year-old brain outlook, because I thought everybody who used pesticides was evil. Everyone's polluting the environment. And there I was, actually in, and I'm not even going to call it the middle of nowhere, because that doesn't exist. There's so many rich histories in rural places in rural Kansas and throughout the Midwest. But learning that there was a mind shift, and there was really a disconnect between the Midwest and the federal government and environmental policy in general. And talking to farmers was really special to me, but I think the most exciting thing about working in Nicodemus, Kansas, if you all don't know the history, Nicodemus is actually the first town west of the Mississippi that freed African Americans went to after slavery to build their own town and community. So they had nothing but their hands and their freedom. And with their hands, they made tools, they dug holes in the ground, they lived in dugouts. Eventually, they built the first school, a post office, and there was a thriving Black community in the middle of rural Kansas. And this was after the Ferguson uprisings. And there I was, again, I didn't know how I ended up there, but divine intervention or something. But I was in this beautiful town, and then I started realizing that, whoa, environmental history goes beyond John Muir. Environmental history is also Black history, and our stories are sometimes hidden in the soil. And it was such a healing experience for me. And I started thinking, what if everybody, regardless of their background, could find themselves reflected in environmental media and storytelling? And if environmentalism could be culturally competent for different people? So I, again, in my little trajectory was like, okay, what do I want to do next? I was a park ranger. I was a park ranger again. And I, had in my mind that I wanted to really transform environmental storytelling in any way that I could to show people the diversity of it on one hand, and then also the importance of environmental justice, and then what the heck environmental justice was for people who didn't understand. So then one other little origin story moment. I don't like saying that because it sounds kind of like a Marvel movie, but maybe I will say it because that's kind of cool. A dream company that I wanted to work at was Patagonia. I didn't really know a lot about them other than the puffer jackets. I could never afford them, but I would try to thrift them. So after I graduated, I got a job at Patagonia headquarters in the middle of Ventura, California. Has anyone been there? Yes. Heard of it? Read Let My People Go Surfing? Okay, cool. So there I was in another town. I love just going to random places. And I was in Ventura, California, little surf spot in the middle of California. And I was working with the founder of Patagonia's best friend, Rick Ridgway, and their director of philosophy as his assistant. And it was really cool to work with the Patagonia OGs. I knew nothing about rock climbing, but apparently he was the first American to summit K2. Any climbers familiar? K2? Okay, nods. And it was such a cool experience to work with these people. These were a bunch of like old white dudes who had the most epic stories of traveling all over the world and climbing all these mountains. And it was my job as this like random girl from St. Louis, Missouri, who knew nothing about their climbing lore and history and their Rolling Stone covers, to just sit there and take notes and listen to their presentations. And I also just befriended, again, all the other Patagonia OGs who worked in the Patagonia archives. And I was learning about how these quirky climbers somehow decided to start a company that became one of the most environmentally friendly companies, and also calls themselves kind of an activist business, because within their business model, they donate a lot of the proceeds directly to grassroots environmental activism. And it was a really unique experience because during my first week of work, everybody was like, we're going to a protest. So at 4 a.m. the next day, I got on a bus, went to San Francisco, joined about 50,000 people with my new colleagues. I think I slept on the floor and marched for climate justice. And it was such a cool experience. But I thought I was going to be there forever. And I just was in this utopia. I mean, really, everybody was wearing Birkenstocks. It was right down the street from a beach. They had organic lunch and breakfast for us. It felt like a little happy little commune. And then 2020 happened. Boo. But important. So I was in this space again, one of the only Black people, but I was like, these are hippies. It's cool. It's all good. And 2020 happened. And I was with all my Patagonia friends. I was really getting into the activism space. And unfortunately, the pandemic happened. And then there was a lot of talk about racial injustice, social injustice, all of these things that we all probably vividly remember during the summer of 2020. And I had to make a choice. A lot of my colleagues were great people. And right before the pandemic, I actually took it to the street with them for a protest we helped organize for endangered salmon. So I was out in the streets of Ventura with signs that said, "Save the salmon," and was going really hard. But then that summer, I looked around and so many of my colleagues that I marched with were silent when it came to speaking up about social justice. And it just didn't click in my mind, because I thought, if I can take it to the streets, for the smallest of organisms, why can't the environmental movement also advocate for people who are experiencing all sorts of social injustices? And then I realized a lot of people just didn't know what the connection was between social justice and environmentalism. And that makes perfect sense, because at that time I started surveying a lot of environmental science programs. You can graduate with an environmental science degree, understanding the science of the climate crisis, understanding what toxic waste is, but not actually being informed about the who. Like, okay, so who is right next to the toxic waste sites and facilities? Who? Okay, there was a lot. Thank you. There was a loss of industry. Okay, there's a ton of people who, okay, there's a coal mine here, but like, okay, who are the people who live right next to it? There's fracking fluid. Who's actually drinking this fracking fluid? Are these rural communities, low-income communities, urban communities, Black and brown communities, Indigenous communities? What's going on? So I realized in a lot of environmental science programs, the who was not being answered in addition to the what. So I was angry and angsty. I'm a little less angry now, still a little angsty. But I wanted to do everything that I could to meet the moment with compassion and love. Because again, there were a lot of people who maybe intentionally didn't care, but there were even more people. Environmentalists, for the most part, are hippy, dippy, crunchy granola, people-loving people. So I thought maybe if I could say it in a way as compassionately as possible that maybe gave people permission to care, even though they don't need permission from me, maybe they can show up and we can really start prioritizing environmental justice in the communities that are most impacted by environmental hazards. Because I really, truly think we have a better shot of getting the carbon out of the atmosphere if we can make sure that most people have access to clean air, clean water, and safe, healthy, organic food, or just the ability to go out in nature and develop a beautiful relationship with Mother Earth. So like Raina mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a shy person, but I posted about it on social media and I called it intersectional environmentalism. And just by a show of hands, who's familiar with intersectional theory? Okay, it's everyone. But I'll say a definition that I talk about in my book, because sometimes it's used as a replacement term for diversity and inclusion, but it's not quite that. It comes from the legal world, and there's a woman named Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And I think one example that really explains it for me, in the, I believe it's the 60s or the 70s, there was a General Motors where, I don't know what's in the book, but there was a General Motors location that fired all of the Black women in the office. So they came together and thought, this is the perfect case of discrimination. We're going to take this to court. We're going to win. We were all fired. Let's do it. And then the case was dismissed under the ground that, okay, there's still white women working in the office, so this can't be a case of gender-based discrimination. And hey, there's technically Black men working at this office, so this can't be race-based discrimination. And that's when intersectional theory was born, because it's important sometimes to look at the overlapping factors that might lead to a particular outcome. So that's the history of intersectional theory, a lot of court cases that were missing those loopholes. And then it was applied to feminism. You know, if we talk about feminism and we just say, women, love them, that's great. But it's important to think about, okay, what are the experiences of women in rural America and their access to healthcare? What are the experiences of Indigenous women who might be living in rural Alaska, of Black women, of brown women, of disabled women, on and on and on? Yes, we might have an identity that we can all relate to, but if we don't look at those other identity aspects, sometimes we miss things. And that's where intersectional theory comes from, and it's usually applied to feminism. So I thought, if I'm an intersectional feminist, I want to be an intersectional environmentalist. I don't just want to think about an environmental issue without thinking about, how does median income impact this? How does where you live impact how you're experiencing the world around you, whether you're in a rural environment, urban environment, etc.? How does your racial background contribute to this because of historic housing discrimination and where people are located and redlining and different things like that? Because if we don't address those different things, we create environmental policy that's not as comprehensive as it needs to be. And when I was studying environmentalism, we would always talk about prevention versus cleanup. And if you look at environmentalism through an intersectional lens, it's not going to be perfect, but you can try your hardest to create solutions that are as comprehensive as possible so there's less cleanup in the future. And I just think it's a lot more empathetic to think about who's being impacted the most, who's being burdened the most, etc. So when I think about intersectional environmentalism, to me, it's really just a form of environmentalism that's rooted in the heart and comes from a place of empathy and understanding and trying to understand communities outside of your own. And it's my greatest hope that in the future, we don't have to preface environmentalism with the word intersectional. It's very long. If you combine the two, it's 12 syllables, intersectional environmentalism. So I hope if we all get together as an environmental community and understand that we can't protect the planet without uplifting the voices of people who are most impacted by the climate crisis and environmental hazards, and if we can't advocate for the communities that are often left out of the climate conversation, then we really can't save the planet. And again, I truly believe, like I was talking about earlier, we will have a much better shot of doing what we need to do in the atmosphere if we can do what we need to do down here on Earth. So I created an org. I talk about it a lot on social media. I write books and do things like that. But I think I've maybe talked too long. What's the time? Okay, cool. So I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. And I think it's also really important before I wrap up to acknowledge environmental justice history. So everything that I'm saying is not new. I like to put words together. I call myself an eco-communicator, really just a person that likes to talk about the earth. But we need more eco-communicators because if the only people who understand climate science are us, our academics, our activists, that's not enough people. And I want to make sure that everyone can come to the environmental movement feeling like they belong there. It doesn't matter if you work in the fashion world, in the tech world, wherever you work, everything connects back to Mama Earth. So if we really want to activate as many people as possible, we should show up as empathetically as we can and also make sure that climate science is as accessible as possible. So I say that just in case you see me like dancing on TikTok, you know why. And also because I want each and every one of us to also be climate communicators. And lastly, okay, so is everyone familiar with the environmental justice movement? If not, it's okay. Most people are nodding. I'm amongst great people, a great crowd. But I want to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of back then, which wasn't that long ago. But to wrap it up really quickly, we had the civil rights movement. We had the Earth Day movement. We're back in the 60s. Woo! Okay, civil rights. People are taking it to the streets. Not too long after, in the late 60s, early 70s, all of a sudden we've got a bunch of hippy dippies, Earth Day people saying, we need Earth Day. And they're also appropriating a lot of the same tactics that the civil rights folks were doing, but they didn't include a lot of the civil rights folks. So we had the Earth Day movement, and we also had the civil rights movement. Thanks to the Earth Day movement, we got the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. They nicknamed it alphabet soup because there were so many policies that were being created in that time. But because they didn't really unite with the civil rights movement, come the 80s, all of a sudden, folks were saying, okay, so we're getting the toxic waste out of these neighborhoods, but it's being diverted to Black and brown and low income neighborhoods. So what would happen if we actually combined efforts to make sure that our environmental movements are as inclusive as possible, like I mentioned earlier, so we can create comprehensive policy? So we started to see people like Dr. Robert Bullard, Hazel M. Johnson of Chicago, that started to study the placement of toxic waste sites and facilities and how that related to race and median income. And that happened in the 80s. And I owe everything from my work talking about intersectional environmentalism to those folks who were doing their thing in the 80s. So I just wanted to say that because it's really important to remember our history, and now for us not to do the same mistakes, because we're in a time where we're seeing massive mobilization for climate and also massive mobilization of people for social justice. So I think now is the time we can learn from our mistakes to combine those two movements together as much as we can, find common ground, don't give in to something called lateral oppression, which I talked about earlier with the students, where we compare our struggles, where we get together and say, well, this is what's happening to my community. It's more important than your community. No, it's time for us to coalition build together and understand that each and every one of us are facing different issues, and we're much stronger together than apart and fighting and playing, the oppression Olympics. Let's not do that. And I really want to have, I think if we can do that, we can have an environmental movement that's truly intersectional in nature and the greener, more equitable and regenerative future that we want to see. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Leah, for your perspective, sharing your experiences, and really inspiring us as we go into this week. I know we're going a little bit late, but we have Leah here, and so we'd like to take a couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to come down here, and if you are attending virtually, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. So, oh, and we've got Erin over here with a microphone too. Question.
Hey, Leah. Whoa, that's really loud. Thanks for being here. I put this in Hoover as well, so you might see it twice, but I'm curious of your perspective, what the role of class consciousness is in the movement and how we can embed that more into our work.
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that's super important. I think that's all of what I'm talking about here. Sometimes when I talk about intersectional environmentalism, I'll have a lot of people who say, well, race isn't the issue, wealth inequality is the issue. And I want to get back to them and say, well, it's both at the same time, sometimes separately, sometimes together. And I think all of those things should be prioritized. Yeah, because when it comes to environmentalism, when it comes to wealth inequality, when it comes to, classism and different things like that, low-income communities all around the United States are definitely bearing the brunt of the climate crisis and environmental hazards and inequality. And then even a lot of solutions when people are talking about how we can, tackle different sustainability issues, like, oh, everyone just needs to get an electric car, or everyone needs to buy this $200 sustainably and ethically made puffer jacket, and everything's going to be okay. And it's not often talked about. And I think another thing, and I know this isn't maybe directly answering your question, but I think that we should also praise communities who are maybe doing things out of necessity, but it's also good for the planet. So, they rebranded trailers into tiny houses, and also thrifting was something I did growing up for survival, and now it's really cool. When I was a kid, I wouldn't dare tell anyone that I did that. The way that my mother reuses her butter containers or other things like that. So I think there's also some narrative shifting as well that should also give credit to folks who are maybe living that way out of necessity, but it has a great impact on the planet. So I don't know if that answers it directly, but yeah, thanks for your question.
Thank you. And that great question came from Cami Saka with Second Nature. So when you ask a question, if you could also just introduce yourself, since we're all here to build relationships.
Thank you, Donna Sink with IFF. Excuse me, Leah, if I'm misquoting you, but I think the last thing you said was that you are looking forward to a greener, more equitable and regenerative future. Can you explain what you as a I don't know exactly how old you are, but I'm almost 60.
29.
As a young person, how would you define regenerative future? What does that mean? I'm not sure I know.
That is such a great question, especially because you'll start seeing like regenerative organic labels coming up or conversations about regenerative organic agriculture, which I think is really cool. Yeah, so from a couple different ways, I define regenerative like agriculture specifically about doing things that are nourishing to the soil, carbon sequestration, etc. Other ways I see regenerative as, I guess, pulling from that metaphor of regenerative organic agriculture is all about healthy soils and making sure the soil can sequester a lot of carbon and those sorts of things, and healthy soil, healthy soil. But if you take that metaphor, I kind of apply that to movement spaces as well. I want to make sure the soil and the foundation of movement spaces is healthy. So there are a lot of environmental activists or even academics and scientists who are not okay. And it's really hard to be okay in a world that seems like it's on fire. So a part of my activism is also joy and is also self-care, community care, and all of those sorts of things to make sure there's a really strong foundation and basis to the way that we're tackling environmental issues. So yeah, I see it that way, if that makes sense. I kind of pull from that carbon sequestration metaphor and put it into movement building, because if there's a healthy foundation, I think everything that's built on top of it has a better chance of succeeding, and roots can grow deeply in healthy soil. So
Hi, my name is Shanali Palacios, and I'm with the Environmental Protection Network. I do want to tell you, my office is currently reading your book as our book club book, and everyone is loving it. Just wanted to let you know that. I'm really curious. You've talked about sort of speaking with and relating to a very wide range of people, from farmers in Kansas to like white hippies in California. And I'm curious to hear from you how you relay your very like high level of knowledge about all of these issues to a very varied audience of people, some of whom maybe have a lot of knowledge of their own, but use different vocabulary than somebody who has like an academic background in these kind of subjects.
I would say you can say the same thing in so many different ways. I don't always say intersectional environmentalism. Sometimes I'll just say, oh, protect people on the planet together. So I feel like, yeah, you can just vary your language. And that's why I think environmental communications is really important. And it's something that I wish could be taught, maybe even as a mandatory course in environmental science and studies programs. Because I think sometimes, like, I never want to be an academic snob. And that's no fun. Like, when you can, it takes practice, but I think it's important to, and again, comes from a place of empathy, to be able to talk to different people about the things that you care about, and then also be open to, listening to hear them speak. So for me, I always want to hear about someone's experience. So for example, giving the farmers enough time to actually tell me and break it down that it's not that they love pesticides. It's just that they're under-resourced, or their families are leaving and going to big cities and they're scared and there's a disconnect between the government. But we could align when it came to, hey, yeah, we want to make sure we protect the earth as much as possible. So I think it's important to find that common ground. And also with the release of Beyonce's new country album, in the wise words of Dolly Parton, who I love, who's also featured on the album, she made a comment about a year ago that I just was so happy. She started talking about climate change for the first time. And she just said, well, God made she's religious. I'm not, but a lot of people are. She's like, if God made the earth, then we should protect it. And I thought that was so powerful and so simple, that she was saying, hey, in my belief system, this is why I think we should care about the planet. If you like God and you like the planet, let's protect it. And that actually kind of sent shockwaves through a lot of religious communities, because she said it in a way that was really accessible to them. And hopefully then they can find other resources that are accessible. But yeah, long story short, I really want to root my work in empathy and understanding and meeting people where they're at. And that's what helps me kind of change the way that I talk to people. And never let anyone tell you that that's dumbing down information. If anything, I think that's the smartest
thing that you can do or the most intelligent thing you can do to reshape that information to make sure that more people can understand? Because like I said, are we really going to save the planet or fix these things if only those of us who study environmental science can understand? I don't think so. I think we have a better shot if we can break it down for folks.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Great, Sadie.
Thank you so much, Leah. My name is Sadie, and I'm
Hi.
from Minnesota. So I'm really curious to know, what has the reaction been of your colleagues at Patagonia, your friends and family back home, your friends in Kansas? What has the reaction been? What's something that's really inspiring for you?
It's been really good. I would say I feel really lucky. My family, it's really special to me because again, I never want to force anyone to do anything. I just want to live by example and make people's lives easier. So my grandma texted me the other day, a paper water bottle, like the ones that we have right now. And she goes, "Is this what you do?" And I thought it was so cute. And then she bought it. Or there's just little changes that my family members are doing. I came home and my mom, and again, I don't care if people are getting things at Target or a refill shop, but she got, I think it was like dial soap in compostable packaging, which I thought was so special. Or my mom will send me articles. My other grandma sent me something actually about this before she knew that I was speaking here. She's like, "There's stuff happening in the Midwest." And I thought that was so special. So I feel like I've seen better results with my family, especially in their own lifestyle changes, just by kind of leading with compassion. And my colleagues at Patagonia, they, again, are all people who are like summiting mountains. So no, they didn't want me to leave, but they've been so supportive and they've even changed the way that they've gone about things as a company and specifically are giving more to environmental justice organizations. And that's also happening with the organization 1% for the Planet. So for a while, 1% for the Planet, they didn't have a lot of environmental justice organizations. It was mainly conservation focused organizations that were getting funding through that. And it's just been so lovely to see organizations like 1% for the Planet and Patagonia think about their environmental justice strategy in a way that feels really authentic to them, which can vary, but it's been pretty good for the most part. There's always outliers, but I try not to think about it.
Great, thank you. And maybe we can conspire with your family to get you back here to the Midwest. Please join me in thanking Leah Thomas. Well, thank you, everyone. This is going to conclude tonight's program, but first I have some housekeeping announcements about tomorrow. If you're not on the conference app that we keep referencing, the Whova app, please get on that tonight. You should have an email about it. You can ask at the registration desk. That's what we're sending out announcements. If there are any changes to the agenda, that sort of thing. There's FAQs in there. So if you have questions about the shuttle bus schedule, which we are now aware of some construction in front of one of the hotels, and so we will be running a little smoother tomorrow. But there's a lot of good information in there on that app. You can use it to message other folks. You don't have to wait until you bump into somebody. You can find them on the app, schedule a time to meet up with them, and then you can stay in touch. The app will be open for 3 more months after this, so it's a great way to start building relationships and reaching out to folks. If you have not signed up for a mobile workshop, there are still a few openings left. So tomorrow's schedule will have workshops here. There'll be registration and food will be down here on the theater level. Sounds much better than the basement, so the theater level is where you will come for food. The workshops will be on the 3rd and 4th floors, so check the app. There's also a big schedule down at the registration table, so if you don't want to look at your phone, you can go look at the schedule there. And then on Friday, we will meet here in the morning. There will be breakfast, and then that's when the mobile workshops will depart. So there's if you need any information on that, let us know. You should have a link in the app and in your email to make sure to sign up for those things. So we will be back here tomorrow. Breakfast is available as early as 7:30 a.m. The first workshop starts at 9, and the shuttles will be running starting at 7:30. The app also has really great local food recommendations. So I know your stomachs are probably starting to grumble. And so please check that out. A lot of wonderful places here in Indy, and follow the mayor's advice. Go out, spend your money in the local community. And also book sales. So if you do not have a copy of Leah's book, she will be available afterwards. Loudmouth Books is here, a local bookseller, and she will be signing books. So please join us out in the lobby after this. And then we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I'm just going to check in. Marsha, are there any other announcements? All right. Thank you so much for joining us all. We are so thrilled that you are here, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.